No, I double down on this and say personally, this is the most important thing that I've learned in Enneagram in terms of my family life. I don't know that there's a close second. Hey friends, this is Jeff. TJ and I recently sat down with our friend Tyler Zach, who hosts conferences. This year, Tyler has created an online gathering called the Enneagram Summit, which focuses on the dynamics of love and relationships. We enjoyed our conversation so much, we invited Tyler back, and as we enter February, the three of us will be working through 4 different ways that our type pairs with others. If you get into this material, we will be posting links to the Enneagram Summit in the show notes of the last episode. The other online speakers are going to include Suzanne Stabile, Jesse Eubanks, Kristen Harden, Dr. Sam Greenberg, Lindsay Frazier, and many others. If you find this meaningful, drop us your thoughts on Instagram or give us some stars on iTunes and Spotify. And as always, may all good things be yours. I'm Jeff Cook.
And I'm TJ Wilson.
And this is Around the Circle.
I'm walking slowly, I'm taking my time. All I could talking is starting to rhyme. I'm letting go of lonely, letting go of strife. I just can't get enough of this beautiful life.
Well, hello, welcome back. I'm here with my friends Jeff Cook and TJ Wilson, and this is part 3 of our series. You can go back and watch the first conversation, which is how Enneagram stances affect our connection with loved ones. The second conversation was how affect groups affect our connections with loved ones. And then today we're going to be talking about how conflict styles affect our connections with loved ones. So to begin, Jeff and TJ, I think it's going to be helpful to kind of define some terms and talk about language when we talk about conflict styles, because there's a lot of confusion, a lot of kind of overlapping terms. And I know, TJ, you just Googled conflict styles just a minute ago, and a whole host of, information came up with different language. So for those who might not be familiar, like, what are the conflict styles and why are they a big deal?
Yeah, thank you. No work has been done on this yet. And so a lot of the stuff that TJ and I have done has been trying to kind of pull all the goodness together, put it in one spot, comment on it. And from that, there's been a lot of innovation, I feel like, in our work. We call the conflict styles coping styles. They have been called the Harmonic Group by Riso and Hudson and others. But the big idea here is, how does your type solve problems? And lo and behold, the numbers divide into 3 very clean sets that are really worth talking about here. There's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of similarities between the 3 sets, and that's kind of where we're going.
Yeah, there's this idea of coping style is, like Jeff said, like, how do you get what you want when you can't get what you want? Like, how do you have fights? How do you face obstacles when your primary motivation, when your primary way of doing things isn't working? And this is really great information to have for relationships, because maybe I'm speaking German and my wife is actually speaking Italian, and we don't understand why we can't understand each other. And lo and behold, it's because we come to problems in very different ways.
Yeah. So stance is about how to get what you want. Like, I'm in this sort of stance so I can assert myself and get people out of the way who are in my way and overcome obstacles to get what I want. But this conversation is important because it's conflict solving, problem solving, and how, like, as you said, TJ, how to get what you want when you can't get what you want. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
Yeah, big idea. For those of you who are familiar with the Enneagram, here's the big idea. You are in your center when you are feeling comfortable in your type. Your type, you're trying to get what you want. So as a 1, I'm trying to feel good. 2s are trying to feel love. 3s are trying to feel successful, etc. When you're getting that, you're centered, right? When you don't get that, you begin to pivot. You begin to push towards stress. But before you get to stress, something happens. What ends up happening is you cut off, most of the types, cut off their secondary center and they elevate their repressed center. This is 1, 2s, 4s, 5s, 7s, 8s, all cut off their secondary center and elevate their repressed center. What 3s, 6s, and 9s do is they repress or they cut off their primary center. This is where the combination is. I realize you might have to listen to this 5 times to get the idea, but as it stands, the secondary center for 1s and 5s are the same. It's their feelings. They cut off their feelings and they elevate their repressed center. And so they're actually using tools of thinking and intuition to get what they want. 2s and 7s, both their secondary center is action, which they cut off and they elevate thinking and feeling to get what they want. And for 4s and 8s, their secondary center is thinking. They cut that off. They elevate feeling and action to get what they want. This ends up being the coping style. It is the combination of your primary center and your repressed center for those types. For 3s, 6s, and 9s, what happens is 9s who are body-centered are going to repress even harder their intuitional center. For 3s, they're going to repress even harder their feeling center. And for 6s, they're going to repress even harder their thinking center. That's going to push them into, again, elevating those other 2 centers to get what they want. And when you look at the combinations, then 1s, 3s, 5s are all elevating action and thinking. 2s, 7s, and 9s are all elevating feeling and thinking. And 4s, 6s, and 8s are all elevating feeling and action. It's really the repression of your secondary center that is how we solve problems. It's all theoretical, but once we put language to it, it's super interesting and clean.
Yeah, if you don't know much about the Enneagram and you come and you take a test and it reveals that you're a type 3 like me, and I'm in the feeling center, that might not make sense to me or make sense to my wife, because my feelings are repressed. Like you said, I use feelings to intuit what other people need and want me to be, who they want me to be. But in terms of like expressing my emotions and being in touch with my feelings, that's I've got work to do because that's repressed. That's really, really helpful. And I'm in the competency triad, so I even I suppress my emotions even more in
Let's talk about competency triad.
like what numbers belong to the competency triad again, and what do we need to know about that?
1s, 3s, and 5s solve problems with action and competency. So 1s want to earn wholeness. We're going to shut down our emotions. We're going to focus on what is right. We're going to think through what's right, and we're going to act on it. And there it is in terms of we are thinking through something and acting on it. 3s are going to want to take hold of excellence. When they're not getting the excellence desired, they're going to shut down their emotions. They're going to focus on the goal. The goal is intellectual. What is the goal? Thinking through it, and then they're going to act in order to get it. And for 5s are going to withdraw in order to get wisdom, and that actually is an action. They're going to shut down their emotions, focus on what's the data, what's the insights, what can I take hold of here in order to feel, and to engage the wisdom and insight that I want in the world. All of these, and this is the really important thing, all of these 3 types, in order to solve problems, they're not getting their primary motive. All of them, in order to solve problems, are cutting off feeling in order to get back to center and feel like they're getting their motive fulfilled.
So another way of thinking about this, that these types, when they fight, when they come up against obstacles that are a little bit more difficult than they're used to, when it's a rough situation at work or at home or something's going badly at school, these types want to take their emotions and set them aside for a few minutes and figure out the right or cleanest solution to the problem. If the dog is getting out of the yard, it's not about the dog, it's about how do we solve this problem. If like all of the things that might come to these types and give them obstacles, they want to solve this by putting aside their emotions and getting to the best solution.
It's great how you can nuance this a little bit too, or to see, first of all, to see the commonalities that, okay, with 1s and 5s, we're going to act very similar in conflict. We're going to try to get rid of emotions because it's not helping our purpose. But for 1s, I know some 1s who have said that they really like structure in conflict.
Yep.
So it can come off a little strange to coworkers or other people who don't get what they're doing, but they'll come back and say, "Hey, here's the structure or the outline or the flow for how we can attack this problem."
Yep.
And what they're doing is there's a right way to do conflict. And for me as a 3, um, I have to confess that at time this wasn't conscious at first, but I really want to look good in conflict. I want to look like I have my crap together. I don't want to blow a gasket. And maybe this is the self-pres talking, but I don't want to look bad in conflict.
Right.
So there's even an image element to the 3's coolness in conflict. But and then for 5s, yeah, I think like you said, it's the data. It's to bring any sort of emotion into it would just make this irrational. And we're trying to make things better. We're trying to work through this, and we can't have irrationality flying around here. We need to do this in a very rational way and be objective here.
Yep.
Yeah, let's stay there, but that's good.
Anything more about the competency triad?
I think we're going to pull a lot out as we start talking about the combinations. But yeah, the big idea of what's the data, what's the goal, what is right, ends up materializing as primary. And so your feelings don't matter. What matters is the data. Your feelings don't matter. What matters is the goal. Your feelings don't matter. What matters is what's right. That's how we solve the problem at hand.
It's good. Okay, let's talk about the positive outlook group.
Bang. Positive outlook is going to, again, it's coming out of motive. When the 2 cannot earn the love that they desire, they're going to spin things positive in the relationships that they have and insert themselves. It's okay. No problem here. I'm here to help. And the I'm here to help is optimistic. This is a solution. So too, the 9. When the 9 cannot get the shalom desired, there's going to be a spinning of the problem at hand. It's like, look, everything's fine. We're all fine here. I don't know why we're all getting uptight. And just the positive outlook there is seeking to combat the feeling that things are out of control and chaotic. And so too the 7. The 7 wants to take hold of joy. They're not experiencing the joy that they want. You're going to spin things positive. You know what? There's probably something fun over here. Notice this. It's a problem solving. Their motive isn't being fulfilled. So I'm going to solve the problem by taking this optimistic posture and elevating, something that has that glass is half full, kind of outlook to it. The thing that's important here is there's no action. What there is a dressing up. There's a spin taking place. For 7s, it's a reframing, right? But in all of these cases, there is something going on in the language of the 2, 7, and 9 in relationship and to themselves where they're trying to take on that positive outlook so that they can get back to center.
It's almost as if these types are trying to skip the problem or ignore it.
Yeah.
Like that, there's this intuitional sense of understanding ourselves and our place in the world, and we're all setting that aside. I identify with 9s. We're all setting that understanding of like there really is something going on here that we need to solve. We're putting that aside and saying, nah, there's not a problem here. It's going to be fine. It's going to work itself out. Or for that, like Jeff said, for 2s, we don't have to worry about this problem because I'm going to fix it for you. It's an unproductive sort of doing and inserting yourself in a way that eliminates the problem by pretending it's not there. And then the 7, there's no problem here. Let's go ride bikes. Not wanting to face hardship or the kind of like stuckedness that 7s are trying to get away from. They're going to run away from problems anyway. So this positive outlook, a way to think about it is as though they're all trying to, in their own way, pretend like there is not a problem here that actually needs to be solved.
I appreciate this group, even though I'm not in it, because as being in the competency group where I want to work through things to get to a positive outcome, I appreciate somebody who comes to conflict saying, you know what, it's going to be all right. Like, we're going to get through this, and just have an optimistic attitude when it comes to conflict rather than a pessimistic attitude. And we can get to the combinations later, but my wife's a 6 and I'm a 3, and when that was a hard thing in marriage is when somebody comes to the conflict to say, "Hey, problem, problem, problem," and it feels like they're saying that everything is going downhill and we're spiraling downward, and that there's no hope. That makes me want to withdraw and not stay in the conflict. So I appreciate this, but I can
Yeah.
see the downside of sweeping things under the rug and causing greater problems down the road.
Yep.
Anything else, or do you want to talk about the emotional response group?
The last thing that you said is really worth naming, that there, in all things Enneagram, a big theory for TJ and I, in all things Enneagram, there's a high side and a low side. So there's a high side, low side to your stress number, to your motive, etc. But to your coping style, there's outstanding elements of positive outlook, outstanding elements of solving problems competently, outstanding elements of solving things with an emotional response. And there's also a severe negative that needs to be named, and we'll probably I'll try and unveil that as we're going.
Gotcha. Okay. And to be clear, because I've heard this two different ways, do you guys call it the emotional response group or emotional realness group?
We say response.
Response. Okay.
The reason that we call 468's emotional response is because they are trying to get an emotional response from the people in front of them. That's how the problem is being solved. The problem is not being solved by actually addressing the problem. The problem is being solved because I'm getting your emotional response to the problem and ensuring that we're on the same team. That's the target. The 8, the 6, and the 4 all want you on their side, seeing the world the way they do. In order to do that, they're going to elevate their emotions and try to get you to empathize with where they're at. Here's what I'm afraid of. Here's what I'm angry about. Here's the thing that is, what would it be? Not right with the world isn't, how would the 4, I don't want to just say this is what we should feel shameful about, but how would the 4 do this, Teach?
So this is actually a really great example of what we're really going to get into. The competency group sees problems in a certain way. The positive outlook group sees problems in a certain way. And the emotional response group sees problems in a certain way. So when Jeff was talking about, like at the very beginning of talking about emotional response, he says they don't want to solve the problem. They want to solve the emotional part of the problem. 4s, 6s, and 8s see the conflict as an emotional conflict to be solved. If there is a physical issue, that's fine. We'll deal with that when we get to it. The problem that we need to solve is the emotional state that has arisen from the potential catalyst that was in front of us. The competency group only sees the catalyst. The emotional thing is something to be set aside.
Yes.
And so when 4s, 6s, and 8s come to these kinds of problems, they want to solve the relational issue. They want to say, the dog got out of the yard. The problem isn't the dog. The problem is I'm mad at you for letting the dog get out of the yard.
Good.
Yeah.
Like that. So all of these types come to the emotional space of the problem.
They want to know if you're on team 4. Are you on team 6? Are you on team 8? That's what matters. The problem doesn't matter. I want to know if you're on my team.
Right.
And so when it's the case that my motive isn't being fulfilled, I need to address who is on my side first.
Right.
That's good. Yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, I think it was Seth Abram, and he does the Fathoms podcast with Drew Moser, who wrote the Enneagram of Discernment. I think they use emotional realness, and the way that the reason they do that is because the outlook group kind of isn't real because they kind of they're overly positive, and the competency group may not be real because they're too calm and collected and trying to use their head to fix it, whereas the 4s, 6s, and 8s are a little bit more like emotionally real and authentic and raw in that moment. They want you to respond in a real way. But I like what you guys are saying in terms of the emotional response, or trying to get an emotional response, a real response out of you, because that's what it means to be human.
To build on that, notice this is the triad that restricts thinking. So cognitively addressing problems is not how problems are solved here. We don't need to think about the problems. We need to act on our emotions. We need to act on our reciprocated care for each other. You see the same way as I do is really the target. And it might be the case that there's no logic at all to that. Is I want to have the emotional connection. We can deal with thinking through things later.
Well, and like in their own way, of course. So fours only see the heart centered, like that is how they see everything in the world. So of course that's the thing that needs to be addressed. Sixes struggle with productive thinking and really lean into their emotional, their heart understanding of themselves and the world. So that is the problem that they come to first. That is the part of the problem that makes the most sense to them. So that's the place where they want to go when they're solving conflict. Eights, I think that eights come to this space because that's the part that's sort of, if it's about fixing something physical, that we don't have to worry about. That's not a conflict. That's not a problem to be solved because we're just going to do that. The thing that needs to be solved is the thing that I understand the least, that I'm less certain is going to just be fixed by me enacting my will in the world. So let's resolve this so that we can get back to living our lives.
Yeah. If the 8 could have solved the problem when they were centered, just by acting on their thinking, the problem would have got solved.
Then it's not a problem.
The fact that it's a problem means they weren't able to fix it.
Yes.
And now it becomes a vulnerability. Now it becomes okay, I need to circle the wagons. Who's on my side? Do you see the injustice I do? Do you see the world the way I do? And I'm going to push you a little bit to see if you're on team 8.
Yeah. I mean, having worked through all three of these groups now, I really value the healthy side of all of them and what they're trying to do. And when me and my wife got into marriage fights early on, I could have, if I would have known this, it would have been really helpful.
No, I double down on this and say personally, this is the most important thing that I've learned in Enneagram in terms of my family life. There's nothing, and I don't know that there's a close second. Mm-hmm. The stuff that we're going to talk about here in a second is the most important stuff that I've learned.
Mm. All right. Well, let's keep going. Do you want to say anything more about these three groups before we dive into the pairings and kind of flesh out how this looks like in real relationships?
Image of restricting reason, restricting action, restricting feeling. If you can name that in yourself, if you can name that in your partner, if you can name that in your kid, it's going to be a lot of the problem is going to at least have context for you to understand it. From the competency group, that's obviously how I'm coming to family problems, is you need to understand this. But
say those three again, Jeff.
Your 4-6-8s are restricting reason. 2-7-9s are restricting action. 1-3-5s are restricting feeling. Oftentimes, if you get in a fight with a 1-3-5 who's in your house, you want them to feel the way you do, and that's not how they solve problems.
I just heard my wife say amen from the other floor.
Yep. And so too, for the 4-6-8, they don't reason when they're problem solving. And you might appeal to them in that space, and it's not going to work because that's not where they are. And so to the 2-7-9, you could say you need to act. You need to do something of this sort.
Stop ignoring it.
It's not how they solve problems.
Yep. It's good. Very good. Okay, how about let's talk about the competency group with the positive outlook group. So relationships between those. So the 1, 3s, and 5s and the 2s, 7s, and 9s.
So this is TJ and I. There it is going to be the case something breaks. What can be very valuable is kind of what we said before. One of us is thinking through solutions. One of us is stabilizing things emotionally. Everything's going to be fine. And then the other person is saying, okay, this is what we need to do to fix things. And so that does have an energy to it that can be incredibly helpful. And if done in tandem, if everybody knows their job and their place and they allow what the other is speaking over them, there's really an engine there for moving things back to center, as it were, even at the worst spaces. What can go wrong is when the 2-7-9 choose not to act at all, and the 1-3-5 get frustrated that nothing's moving here. We're not getting back to actual practical solutions, and then there's disconnect. I'm going to live in non-action. I'm going to live in, not appreciating, I suppose, the feelings of the 279. There's real positives to how we solve problems. And there can be, the downside when we don't actually connect over our problem-solving strategy.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways in which these two things can really help complement each other, because like positive outlook types can sort of help give perspective that may be missing from 1s, 3s, and 5s. It's often the case that between me and Jeff, he is trying to solve a problem that I notice isn't an actual problem.
Right.
Like, and that's part of what the positive outlook brings here, is that like I understand that you see this thing, and also it's not a big deal. Nobody cares. We're just going to move on.
That's perfectly said. That should have been footnoted. Sometimes the 1, 3, and 5 are trying to advance a problem that doesn't need to be seen as a problem. And so it might be the case that the 279 come in and say, look, seriously, I think we're overblowing this.
Mm-hmm. And the exact flip side of that is that we, 2 7s and 9s, often ignore problems that need to be addressed. And the 1, 3, and 5 come to this and say, what are you doing about this thing?
Yep.
And the 2 7 9 says, what thing? I can't see anything there. It doesn't look like anything to me. And the 1, 3, and 5 says, yeah, we're not playing that game. We need to solve this. Let's do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just appreciate, I think I can see the positives between these groups of kind of moving together towards a future and staying positive and hopeful through it.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think a lot could be swept under the rug, or you might not get to the bottom of a problem if you're just kind of trying to avoid it or think logically about it. You're not going to get the heart stuff out that needs to get out in order to heal.
Right.
Yeah.
A special note, common wisdom is that 2s are the type that is most likely to be involved in codependence, problematic codependence, and allowing, so to picture the parent who ignores their child's drug addiction until it's too late. Like this kind of behavior. This is a great example of a positive outlook kind of mindset. And when these types are when positive outlook and competency are in conflict with each other, you have this situation where positive outlook is ignoring a very serious problem. The competency group sees this issue completely differently and wants to say, why are you ignoring this problem? This is something that's really gonna be an issue eventually, and or this needs to be addressed right now. There's got to be some middle ground, but you have to start from understanding that the person across the table from you sees this in a very different way. The positive outlook group is often not conscious that that's what they're doing. They don't see this as an emotionless, data-driven problem that needs to be solved.
Yeah.
2s see a someone that they love with all of their being, and they will do anything for. And they want the best for that person, but they may not see some of the issues that need to be addressed in that relationship because of their love and care for that person. There's just a very different perspective.
Yeah, it's worth naming that we fall into these coping styles very fast and without thought. Like nobody's saying, oh, well, now is the time that I'm going to solve problems intellectually. Nope. Default. You get hit, you're not getting what you want. How do you normally cope? And that's the coping style.
And we're just misreading each other.
Yep.
Or making assumptions right off the bat. So if my wife comes and expresses a concern in a very concerning way to me, and it feels like she has no hope for us, then I'm immediately shutting down, getting more defensive, and I just dig my heels in deeper because we're missing each other.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about we should talk about your pairing next. There's one thing I wanted to say, because I thought this was really worthwhile in our last podcast, is notice some of the very common romantic relationships. I want to make everything about romance in these interviews, but in romantic couples, you can see a little bit more of the dynamic, the unfiltered problem solving that can take place. And this obviously applies to children and coworkers and all the rest. But ones routinely match up with positive outlook. And it should be named that that's very commonly the case because the positive outlook confronts and is a voice against their inner critic. So the 279 very much like just fantastic relationships for ones because of the positive framing that can often take place. It's also the case that 7s and 5s are often in community together. It's often the case that 3s and 9s can be, and 2s and 5s can be. 2s and 5s in particular is real interesting here. One's, very thinking dominant. One's very feeling dominant. There can be a real complementary side to that relationship.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, I talked about me and my wife, so we can move to that pairing, the competency and emotional response. So we got the 1, 3s, and 5s, and the 4s, 6s, and 8s.
Yeah. The goal in problem solving for the 468 is relational, and the goal in problem solving for the 135 is going to be action oriented. So that relational action side is going to color this. What needs to be noted, however, is this is that diametrically opposed, feeling versus thinking going on. One set of this couple is really going to say the emotions matter most. And the other side is going to say, no, the thinking matters most. And so this is kind of, it's kind of a yin-yang situation going on here. But if you can get on the same page, then the relational action can have a lot of power.
There's a real sense of like when these two are looking at a similar problem, it's almost that they're speaking past each other. Just literally just seeing the conflict, whatever situation, in very different ways, and bringing a completely different intelligence center to the understanding of it. And we all know what it's like to experience an emotional thing that is devoid of logic. We all know what it's like to have a feeling that doesn't really make sense but is still present anyway. We all know what it's like to say that's not a logical thing, and the emotional space, I don't have space for the emotion here because it doesn't make any sense. Like it's two sides that are really trying to come together and not in ways that lock in. So you have to notice that about yourself, about the person across the table first, before you can ever get to really resolving what's happening in front of you.
The emotional response group, in bringing up real emotions, makes me really if I'm in an unhealthy place or insecure place, it triggers my shame. Their emotional realness can instantly make me feel ashamed, and then as a 3, hopeless that things are going to get better. But for my wife Lindsay, who is in the emotional response group, and a 6 who has fears, when she brings something up and throws up the yellow flag and says something is wrong here, and then I try to take my feelings out of it and respond very with my thinking, that or put logic to it, then I just reinforce to her that I don't think it's that big a deal. And then her fears and anxiety just skyrockets because she's like, how can we resolve this if you don't think it's a big deal? That's just kind of our pairing.
Yeah, there's when 4s, 6s, and 8s bring forward their emotional space into a conflict setting and it gets dismissed by the person across the table from them, now they know that problem is not going to be solved. For the 4, it means if I show myself to you and you dismiss my emotions, then you can't see me, and I'm not really, we're not here together. If the 6 brings their emotion, if the 6 brings their fear, my partner's a 6 as well, and when she brings very real fears to the table, if I'm dismissive because of how ridiculous they sound, which I will admit is often the case, they're like ridiculous fears, I don't take those well. I'm better now than I used to be. But like when I am dismissive of her fears, then it shows her that she's not safe with me. It makes her feel dumb. It makes her feel ununderstood. It makes her feel like if this problem is not going to be addressed because he thinks it's stupid, then that like I'm unsafe now. And I don't know where we stand as far as the stability of our relationship because now he thinks I'm dumb. If an 8 brings their emotional self to a space and someone dismisses it, then that 8 puts up a wall against that person because you will not take advantage of my emotional vulnerability. If you're going to dismiss this, then I'm out. And so there's a real sense of like when we dismiss the emotional part that these types are bringing forward, it can do serious damage to the relationship that we have with that person.
Yeah. This is why you get the push-pull dynamic with 4s, but it's the same with 6s and 8s. There's a lot of energy of hitting you to see if you're on team 4, hitting you to see if you're on team 6, you know.
Yeah.
And that's not about them being a jerk. Or the 8 who's intentionally telling crass jokes to see if you're going to laugh. They're telling the crass joke to see if you accept them at a more foundational level. Like it's a testing of the waters. That likewise is how 6s are working. It's I'm telling you my concerns about things in the future, in part because, you know, I'm aware of these future concerns, but much more importantly is, are you on team 6? Are you acknowledging my concerns in a way that makes me feel as though you're loyal? And that's what's desired. And it's the same thing with
Ooh, yeah, this is 4, 6s, and 8s. The testing that they do, that's so helpful to know if you're in a relationship with one of these 3 numbers, to know what they're doing, so that you can reassure them, and just to even say something as simple as, "This is a big deal."
Yep.
I mean, that's a huge statement. Or to the positive outlook group, like, "We're gonna be okay." Just some simple statements like that can really go a long ways to disarming.
I do think that I think you're right in saying the energy here probably needs to start with the 1, 3, 5. If you're going to solve the problem, the first part of solving the problem is going to have to be you acknowledging how the 4, 6, 8 is coming to you in these ways. You need to get them on board, and then you can move forward to solve the problem. As I'm looking at this list, again, romantic couple wise, these are not very common. Like the pairings just aren't there very often. So obviously you're in a relationship of this sort, Tyler, in terms of the 3, 6. I know a 5, 8 couple. I know some 1, 8 couples, and it's not everything else isn't very common. So
Well, I think it's because there's more,
and I bet you it's part of this.
yeah, it seems that there'd be more sparks in this combination. Like we talked about in the stances, there's some couples that might be a little more flat, but this is definitely where the sparks will come in, of one's aggressively saying, "Okay, this is how we're going to deal. Here's the process. Here's how we're," and then, you know, the emotional realness they're flaring up, and there's just going to be a lot of energy there. Yeah. Well, do you guys want to move on to the last pairing, the positive outlook and emotional response? Great. So we got the positive 2, 7s, and 9s with the emotional response, the 4s, 6s, and 8s.
So again, the 4, 6s, and 8s fail to think. 2, 7s, 9s fail to act. It's really that this will be much more common romantically, I think, because in part, you know, action itself isn't necessarily primary here. What is primary is getting on the same emotional page. And so I think TJ was kind of saying this cleanly in terms of 6s and 9s. You know, there's the positive outlook that actually complements and perhaps provides a lot of balm for the 6's concerns. You know, I see 2s and 8s coming together, you know, the 8 who is fighting the world and the 2's here to help you, you know, and so, I mean, that's just going to naturally go together. But there's also the negative. We don't actually move out of this place one of us is positive, one of us is emotional, and we're not actually addressing some things that might be of actually legitimate, need of correction.
Yeah, this is like I said, this is me and my partner, a 9 and a 6, and we have been together for like 17 years. That's not true. It's maybe 14. And we have never had a significant fight because of this, because I want to ignore problems and she does not want to lose her safety in the space of conflict. So like when we do have things that we need to argue about, to disagree on, it usually starts with an almost fight, and then we go our separate ways and we come back to it and we address the thing in hand. And 4, 2, 7s, and 9s, like we always come to problems wanting to see the way out. We always come to problems wanting to see what's on the other side of the problem. That's part of what positive outlook is we'll get to the other side of this. And 4s, 6s, and 8s want to address the emotionality of the problem. And if that's all we have to do, then we can do that and fix the fence and know that we're going to be on the other side of this. The real problems come in here when any of these types are really sort of in the negative, the unhealthy parts of their problems, where 2s, 7s, and 9s might be unwilling to acknowledge and address the emotional issues being brought to the table because of that positive outlook, because they don't know how to face their own inner issues, because they don't know how to engage emotionally with the person who's bringing up these problems. That can be a real hindrance to 2s, 7s, and 9s helping, like being part of the solution in conflict, in relational conflict. When 4s, 6s, and 8s cannot move out of their own negative emotional space, that can also be a real issue. When they can't see the other side, the sort of non-subjective, the objective side of what is coming to the table, when they can't see their own irrationality being brought to the table, that can also be a huge problem for these pairings to address issues. Because if one side says there is no light at the end of the tunnel and the other side can only see the light at the end of the tunnel, basically you're looking at like they're standing on two opposite sides of the tunnel and refusing to see each other. So noticing this coming together, I think it's a little easier for this pairing than other pairings, but that's still something that can be a real hindrance to growth and relational excellence.
Yeah, it seems like this pairing might get stuck more. I know we talked about that in our previous conversation. There's different pairings that might get stuck and have a hard time moving forward. It seems like this one would be kind of stuck in quicksand a little bit with the emotional realness group kind of, or the emotional response group kind of holding them in a circling pattern. Like this is a problem, and the 2, 7s, 9s are trying to escape, trying to how do I get out of this? And I'm like, we're not going because this is a problem, and we're not letting you get out of this. And even for the 8s who are in this sort of stance, you think that they're very action oriented. You could think that they might help get the couple or the pairing out of the holding pattern, but sometimes 8s will double down. From my perspective, the 8s will double down and say no. They'll continue to fight and fight and fight and fight.
Yeah.
And so I can see how even though they're action oriented and future oriented, can still get keep this pairing stuck.
Yep.
I agree on that. I think the 8, if you're an 8 or a 7 in one of these relationships, that the assertive energy is going to probably take over and pull. But some of the most like, dare I say, some of the most lethargic couples I know end up actually being in this pairing. So 2-4 couple, for example, there might not be a lot of movement for that couple, and TJ can talk about 6, 9s and how hard it is to, for example, get engaged.
Yeah, 8 years.
Might take a while.
8 years.
8 years it took.
It was me. It was all me. I'll take the blame on that.
But there's an energy
the-
there.
Yeah, the amount of weddings that we went to prior to engagement where my partner, like we were fully invested, just not engaged. And my partner, I'm working a wedding and she is there crying the whole time. Yeah, huge problem for us.
See,
We overcame it. We figured it out. Everything's okay.
see our episode on stance and how there's a great example of the reactive type reacting and responding to the withdrawn energy.
Mm-hmm.
But this is definitely going to happen here with no 1, 3, or 5.
Right.
This is great. Any other last comments before we talk about each of these groups paired with themselves? So the positive outlook and positive outlook. Any other comments on the positive outlook and emotional response?
Yeah, I think you're going to see, like we've talked about a couple of the pairings that are common in romance, but as we get into these other pairings, it's all over the place in terms of you got connected to the person who solves problems the way you do. And I bet you a huge part of it is that you were able to stay in that relationship, find some traction, find some grounding because you were solving problems the same way. And it allowed the plant to take root, as it were. But I bet you a lot of people, when they separated from a potential lover, probably happened here. You were solving problems, and then you suddenly realize you're very different than me in terms of how this is working. And this can be a place, if you go back to our episode on attachment styles, when affect groups, this is a place the 3, 6, and 9 might decide to detach. This is a place where 1s, 4s, and 7s are going to get frustrated. This is a place where 2s, 5s, and 8s are going to say, you know what? You're not receiving me, rejecting me. I don't think I can trust you.
It's good. That's really good. Let's talk about positive outlook and positive outlook.
My beloved stepfather and mother were 7 and 9. There's all sorts of great things about positive outlook, problem solving. When both of them are positive, man, that's just sunshine and rainbows.
Great.
When
It's
the
awesome.
bank forecloses on your house, everything's gonna be fine.
It's gonna be fine. It's gonna be fine.
Until it's not. And then everything's gonna be fine as we'll find a new house.
The meme of the dog sitting in the room on fire and there's a word bubble that says it's fine. It's that, just 2 of them.
Yes.
This has to be kind of confusing because I actually did a premarital counseling for a couple that was a 7 and 9. And it's got to be confusing to them when they get mad at the other person and they're not exactly sure why. Because they're like, I'm keeping things positive. They're positive. Like, what?
Yeah.
What's the problem? There's a problem, I think, but I don't know what the problem is.
Motive will certainly come into play here. For example, the 9 wants to keep everything shalom. 7 wants to go on an adventure. And so that element is going to pick up. The 2 being in the relationship with either the 7 or the 9 that actually is going to be a little bit more common. The 2 is going to respond to the 7's. Okay, let's run over here, and the 2 is going to respond to the 9 saying, okay, well, how do we just ensure that things don't break? And the positive spin there just is going to color the dynamics of how the problem is functioning. But this is one of those, I had mentioned it earlier, but coping style is that bridge between you and your stress number. So you're moving from your motive into stress, but before you get to stress, you're going to try and solve the problem. But if things actually break, the fear of the 9 is going to, insert itself. 7 is going to go 1 in stress, and then it's going to be, okay, we need to get things ordered. The 2 is going to realize that positive outlook isn't working, and the ferocity of 8 can kind of take over in that space. And so I think if you're in this sort of couple, I imagine the move into your stress number might be a little quicker. If you're both positive outlook and things still aren't, getting solved through that.
I was just thinking of that because I was going to ask TJ, okay, if a 7, you're in a relationship with a 7, and the 7 wants you to do all kinds of fun, crazy things with them, and it's interrupting your peace and your harmony in your life. Like, what's going to happen? How does that conflict get resolved?
So that's part of what is on the table for this pairing is that they are either going to slowly drift away from each other because they didn't really realize that they were drifting away,
Yeah.
or they're going to come to blows all of a sudden
So the 9
in these
so the
kinds of
9 moves
scenarios.
down to the 6 and becomes
Mhm.
anxious, and then the 7 moves to the low side of 1 and starts getting critical of you for not
Yeah.
doing what they want.
And it explodes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really, the explosion isn't taking place in the 7. It's coming out of the 9 and the 2. For those of us who love 9s and have actually lived with 9s, we know what explosive anger looks like from the 9. And it's like, oh, why are you punching holes in the wall all of a sudden? This, it doesn't seem like this isn't your Enneagram type, you know. But there is a hole punched in the wall,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and so too the 2. The 2s, I think, move to 8 space, you know, and we are a little bit more accustomed to that move of, okay, you know, now things need to get fixed.
I've seen 7s though move to 1 and like not float away, but pretty quickly go to the low side of 1 and get really hypercritical and start.
Yeah, that's what it looks
Yeah,
like.
yeah.
It's the frustrated, reactive element. And it can be a very, you know, again, like ones, the anger might go inward.
Mhm.
I'm the one who's, you know, always going has gotten us into trouble.
Yeah.
And so there can be a very sheepish stress move for the 7.
And 2s are, you know, positive, Hulk out, go to 8.
Right.
And, you know, and it can get really angry after a certain while.
But for all 3 types, the problem, the real, like the unhealthiness, the problem, the explosion, whatever, the thing comes down to the reality that these types are ignoring or trying to escape the problem in front of them. They're trying to not address it with their body and their intuition. They're trying to be happy and maintain a positive look of the future.
Well put.
Like that is the preference. And when that, like, you can't ignore problems forever. Like we said when we talked about competency, and like with me and Jeff, sometimes you can ignore problems and they'll go away on their own. But there are some things that the pairing of these 2 types will ignore until it becomes a dam that's breaking, and it's gonna wash everything away.
It's well put, TJ. I love the exclamation point that you put on that. You guys want to talk about competency group and competency group?
This is the marriage I'm in, and one of my children is a 5, and so 1, 3, 5s. We all solve problems with our head. This is, again, you know, a place of real connection. Of my wife and I have the chemistry at that 1, 3 place. We both want to achieve. We want to do some stuff, and something breaks, and she's moving towards, okay, what's the goal? And I'm moving towards what's right. And a lot of times there's an overlap. It's a very thoughtful or action-oriented way of coming to problems. In good news and in bad news, we don't care about each other's feelings in that space. And the feelings are going to be an obstacle to us getting back to where we need to be. And those can get set aside for a minute, because really, what do feelings offer us in the midst of problems? Nothing. Let's go. Long-term strategy-wise, that's not going to be helpful, because your lack of addressing your emotional life can catch up with you and really make you an unhealthy person, or, you know, you haven't actually wrestled with how did, you know, these things that you were trying to achieve, when they didn't go through, how did it make you feel? Because all those people left, all those people, you know, didn't care about you, or, you know, this, perhaps if you're an unhealthy 1, 3, or 5, you know, your way of being in the world actually really put some people off. You know, see Sherlock, for example. Sherlock solving problems with his heads and just neglecting, not even caring about people's emotions, and is just very curt and dry, and here's the data, deal with it. And, you know, the relational damage that takes place there can be severe.
As a quick side note, have we typed Watson?
I mean, I would want to say Watson's probably a 2, or I don't think we did, though. Yeah.
Okay, then never mind. I think a really important thing to note with these types is that emotions cannot be set on the shelf. Your heart center cannot be ignored for long-lasting commitment. Even if it's your business partner or a total stranger that works in the cubicle next to you, or a teacher that you're never going to see again after this year, your emotional space cannot be ignored. And there's whole generations of people who had to learn the hard way that dealing with their emotions is something that you have to figure out how to do. And so when 1s, 3s, and 5s find themselves across the table from another 1, 3, or 5, that this is something that it's easy and natural and safe to say, you know what, we're going to deal with the emotions later. Let's solve the problem. But when that practice becomes habitual, eventually you are going to come up against a problem where the thing that needs to be solved is your emotional state, and you've never learned how to do that.
Yeah.
Particularly unself-aware 1s, 3s, and 5s will not even know that the thing that they're bringing to the table is their emotions. And then the person across the table from them can't solve that because you don't have all the data anyway. Because the person that's bringing the problem isn't giving a complete picture because they can't see it for themselves. So there's a reality to all problems, all conflict have an emotional component, and you cannot ignore that and live a full, successful life.
Yeah, it seems to me that the potential for deep intimacy could be missing in this
Yes.
competency. Because even me and my wife joke about this, where when she makes fun of me, or she's sarcastic, or she gets angry, I'll be like, uh, like that's kind of sexy, honey, because there's juice there, and even if it's anger or some other emotion, there's some sort of juice there. Whereas the 1s and 3s, or 3s and 5s, and that if they don't get their heart out in the open, it could lack some juice there. And
Mhm.
that's the opposite problem, which we're going to talk about when you have the emotional response and emotional response people.
Yeah.
But so I think that's
It-
the thing that I'm thinking about is not um, everything could be going well. You could be doing conflict well. You could be a great team, but continuing to press forward so that there can be that realization of, or reaching that potential for great intimacy in the relationship.
Yeah, it might come in different spaces than, either in problem solving or even at their centers. Um, some stuff might really get awakened for 5s when they're at the high side of their stress number. For example, the 7ness may come out, and it may have more a different kind of element that all of a sudden is thrust forward. I could see that for the 1 going into security at 7, likewise, may get beyond their rigidness, as it were, their mores, and push into something that's more explorative. And then 3s may have something at 6 in 6 space. But I do think you're right. I mean, just because I'm in this sort of relationship, I think that this is like I suppose I hear of other people's romantic relationships and their kicks, and I'm just like, really, that's where you go. I'm fairly surface level, and as been said on our podcast numerous times, I just don't talk about romance or sex very often. That's not the thing that energizes me in those ways. That's my presence in the world really is not defined by my sex life, whereas I understand a lot of people like that actually is where their mental and physical lives go. I'm going to accomplish some stuff, I'm going to build some stuff, and I'm going to just get juiced on that front. And lo and behold, the 3 is amazing on these fronts, and our connectedness takes place there. And there is a physical, emotional, sexual dynamic that does color, some of the energy that goes, in those spaces. So,
and even backing up and looking at the difference between a romantic partner a romantic partnering of this type and a non-romantic partnering of
Yep.
this type. The romantic pair has an automatic sort of leg up into the emotional space because you have like being in a partnership like that, you have to deal with emotions sometimes, whether you want to or not, because you have them and you express them. There's a lot of partners like this that are non-romantic, so like thinking a little bit more siblings or business partners, or like I said, like the person in the cubicle next to you. There's still a level of emotionality here that is easy to ignore, that you won't have real relationship if you do ignore it. That means like if you are not addressing the emotional part of these kinds of conflicts, then you're just automatons working next to each other on an assembly line.
In my experience, what ends up happening is the 3 and the 5, they actually do get into their emotions when they're secure.
Yeah.
And that would make sense. It would be 3 going to 6, the 5 is going to 8. There is now that I have my motive fulfilled, now that I'm feeling good, now I can talk about my inner life. And of course, for the 1, they will get to emotions very quick when they're stressed out.
Right.
And it's going to be in that space of self-understanding and bringing forth all of the this is how I feel will come out for the 1 in that space.
So good. Any more thoughts, or should we move on to the emotional response and emotional response?
Yeah. 4, 6, 8's emotional response. Again, you're going to see a lot of pairings here, especially 4, 6 and 6, 8. I know a ton of 6, 8 couples.
Yep.
They know how to fight, and there's going to be or hopefully they know how to fight. They at least do fight, and then they're going to learn how to fight maybe as it goes. But it's, are you on my team? 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 Yes, let's fight. And that is just how the very opposite to the 1, 3, 5s, correct?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And there you go.
Yeah, it's the opposite side of the existential coin.
It's the scene in Ratatouille, like where Remy is going through the vent, and the 2 lovers, French lovers, have pistols, and like when the guy says, "You don't have the guts," and she shoots the gun, and they both look, and they're like, and then they start kissing. You know?
Oh
Yeah.
my!
Yeah, there's the emotional space occupied by these types, like bringing their emotions to the table, can be like there's a lot of connection there. The like emotional, relational energy, the subjectivity of these types, they are continually bringing that to the conflict, to the problem solving in front of them. That can be great because it's all about relational connectivity, but it can also be really problematic because they can't necessarily, like when they are unhealthy, they can't necessarily see each other's emotional space. And they can't see, like, especially if different types. So like if it's an 8 and an 8, it's going to be its own kind of dynamic. But if it's an 8 and a 6, they might be shooting past each other because they're talking about different parts of their emotionality. A 4 and an 8 are talking about very different parts of their emotionality. Yep. This is one of the reasons that 4, 8 couples have so much problems, because until they figure out what they can connect on, they're both bringing entirely emotional space to the table, and they don't know how to talk to each other.
Yeah.
Gonna value highly authenticity, and that's probably
Yep.
gonna be their magnet.
Yep.
I have a confession to make. I've watched the first couple seasons of Love is Blind, and I don't really go for reality shows that much. I definitely do not like The Bachelor. There's a lot of reasons why I don't watch those shows. But the Love is Blind concept was really interesting to me because you got engaged to the other person without seeing them. Kind of like The Voice, where you pick somebody based on their voice, not how they look. This concept is really intriguing to me, because you would get engaged and propose just through having heart-to-heart conversations behind a wall for a couple weeks.
Right.
And so it's like, oh, this is a really interesting experiment here. But then, because I don't watch reality shows, I found it, knowing the Enneagram, I found it really, really intriguing to see these combinations at play here.
Mhm.
And one of them was a 4 and an 8 combination, and they would fight and fight.
Yeah.
And to Jeff, to your point, then all of a sudden they'd be making out. It's like,
Yep.
and the four would be doing the pushing and the push pull thing, like just being
Mhm.
animated, and then push pull, and then the 8 doesn't know what they're doing. It is like, what is going on? But then they kind of like the chaos and, and the intensity of the unpredictable.
It's the
It's not the
intensity.
they're
Yeah.
not the 4 wasn't predictable, and they're all over the place. And the 8 kind of
Mhm.
like that, and the 8's loyal, so the 8's not going anywhere. It's not getting depressed and passive aggressive and leaving. The 8's fighting for the relationship. So there's just lots of fighting, passion, and then making up, and it was
Yeah.
it was really fun to see kind of these combinations play out. And then the TV loves it. The TV loves these emotional response and emotional response couples because it makes for good TV.
Mhm.
But yeah,
Yeah, the 1, 3s, and 5s not very commonly put on reality TV shows. Like they
Yes.
so I was saying there's
That
there's
4,
lots
8
of juice is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Lots of
right?
juice.
Yep. Lots of juice. Lots of juice.
As you were talking, I was like, do you? I don't know if anyone listening like has a crush on a podcaster. Like that would be that sort of thing. Like you've never seen this person before,
Mhm.
you know, but you're like, this person's amazing. I would really like to go out to dinner with this person. I could see that happening. Anyway,
I have a crush on a podcaster, but it's myself, so it
Yeah,
doesn't
that's
really
what
count.
That's wow. TJ just went to the low side of 3 there pretty quickly.
his voice is so smooth.
It's just black butter.
Sometimes I stare at my websites that I create, TJ, and it's a little too long and find pleasure in it.
It happens. It happens. I get it. No, but there is like thinking about the pairing here, that it's interesting to think that the problems that might need to be solved might get pushed into the back burner because we bring the emotional space first. Like we want to solve the emotional spot first. So if there's a practical problem that needs to be solved, we might not get past the emotional space. We might hit this wall and either, start having sex instead, or like this might be the place where the relationship breaks because we can't get over this hurdle to get to the functional parts of the conflict or whatever else is happening. In romantic situations, there's hopefully a commitment there that keeps bringing us back to the same well. There's I can easily see like an 8 and a 6 not being able to get past the emotional space of the 6 expressing their loyalty concerns, and the 8 feeling like they're constantly being challenged, like they're constantly being questioned, like that loyalty that they committed to in the first place is always being questioned. And not being so for me, for my understanding, the real problem when it comes down to it for 4s, 6s, and 8s, when they are paired with another 4, 6, and 8, is being able to see the other person's emotional space.
Yeah.
When you can't see the effect that you are having on someone else, then you're not going to be able to resolve conflict. When you can't see that your questioning of the other person's loyalty or your own focus on your emotions means that you can't see the other person, then that person doesn't feel seen. And when you're both doing the exact same thing, you can't see the other. You're only seeing yourself in this space.
Well put.
One thing that got brought up, which I had not thought to bring up, is that sometimes we have relationships with people who are our same type.
Mm-hmm.
And in romance, it doesn't happen that often. But I think as you were speaking, I have seen 8 and 8, especially when you're young. You might connect with somebody that's your same type. But that 8-8 dynamic, I do know
Mm-hmm.
a handful of 1-1 couples I think ones are maybe the most likely to come together on these fronts. This is where I know, Tyler, you're a big fan of instincts and those discussions, but if it's the case that you are in a romantic relationship with a person of your same type, I bet you it's the case your instincts are very,
Yep.
that's where the disconnect, the complementariness is probably going to be severe.
Yeah, I ran into two threes that were married to each other. I'm like, what in the world?
Okay.
How is
Gonna win.
and
I mean,
It's the couple in Christmas Vacation who are the neighbors.
why is the carpet wet, Margot? I don't know, Todd.
That's it.
with the three couple, the one of them I think is a self-pressed three with a four wing, with more of a four wing at play right now, and
Yeah.
the other one was more of a
Mm.
sexual three with a more of a two wing. So yeah, that's an interesting point, Jeff. That yeah, we can marry our same type, or have a best friend that's the same type. I love getting around threes that love encouragement, and we can just encourage each other back and forth all day.
Right.
It's like I might have time for this.
Yeah.
I don't need to go anywhere.
You get a trophy. No, you get a trophy.
Yes.
No, you get the
Yes.
trophy.
It's the the thank you note for the thank you note that you sent me. Like it you know, all of these things have a potential to become an infinity mirror.
Yeah.
But there can be some energy derived from being across the table from your same type.
Well, again, this is where all this 4-part conversation, like I keep saying, it's like a 3D. And last night I was thinking, well, it's kind of, is it 9D or is it how many dimensions is this? I don't know. But the emotional response group can, at least each other, they'll know that they care. Like they care enough
Mhm.
to express themselves, and they can find common ground. But then, as you know the type, then you can understand how they're going to miss each other, where the potential conflicts might arise. So it just, again, helpful to keep staying on the journey and keep learning all the different layers.
Yep. And even in the midst of us all having conflict, our stance still plays a role. Are we withdrawn in our positive outlook? Are we withdrawn in our emotional response? Are we withdrawn in our competency? Like I know the answer, but I'm not going to put it forward until I'm asked about it. That might be the case with fives.
Yeah.
And our like reactive, the independent stance, like these all play a role in how we solve our problems. Our own personal motivation plays a role in how we solve these problems. Nines want peace and harmony. We want to avoid conflict. So this is part of why we say that there is no problems, because we don't want to face the hardness of dealing with this conflict. Our own primary intelligence center plays a role. Like all of this is the map informs all of the rest of the map. So becoming more and more aware, just being aware that you are the type of person who pretends like the problem doesn't exist. That's a huge step in the direction of learning how to be better in relationship with other people, etc.
Jeff, if we start wrapping up here, my goal is to try to make this shorter than the previous conversation. As a 3, I'm like, my goal is to try to make it a little bit shorter.
I had said early on that this is the most important thing that I've learned in Enneagram, and that's because in my family, there's 3 of us who our coping style is the same. We all are competency. And so when problem emerges, 3 of us have a language that we speak. It's very quick. And even if it's the case that the data is being elevated, the goal is being elevated, we're still solving that problem on the same wavelength. And I want to say it's almost a language that we speak. And then the 4th member of our family has a problem, and all of us end up speaking a very different language. And that can feel ostracizing when somebody isn't engaging problems the way that you do, and it can be befuddling to the rest of us, especially if you share a problem-solving coping style that, and you team up, against the other person, and so just being able to name your coping style and how you're solving problems really does it, you're naming the game that's being played. You're naming, we're on a football field, as it were, and you're playing baseball over here. And just being able to say that there's different ways that you're trying to get back to center so that you can get your motive, because that's actually what we all want. We don't want to be problem solving. We want to be in that space where we're centered, where we're able to get the thing that we want most. That's what Enneagram's all about, is your motive there. And, being able to engage people at that wavelength can be incredibly helpful, because if you don't, obviously things are going to break because you're already in problem solving mode.
And it cannot be said enough, that doing self-work is great, good. Like this is the best thing that you can do to improve any relationship that you have. And so it's good that you want to work on this thing. If the person across the table from you, if your spouse, if your cubicle partner, your child, like whatever else, if they're not in a space where they are interested, are aware of their own Enneagram type, you are not allowed to type them. Number one rule of Enneagram typing is that you are not allowed to type other people.
But if you want to break the rule, this is a fantastic way to do it. Just name how they problem solve. You can totally just name it.
Yeah. So if you are trying to resolve, like if you're trying to come to spaces where you have continual conflict with the same person and they don't know your type, or they don't know their type, then maybe introduce the Enneagram to them. We have a podcast called Start Here that is all about learning your type and why this is valuable.
Better way.
There's what?
It's a better way than my. Never mind. I'm sad. I'm in a weird mood today.
Totally fine. There's no problem here. It's just really, really important to know that you can't type another person. You can guess and hold that loosely, but if you really want to get down to this, the other person needs to be into the Enneagram on their own right, and they are the only ones who can type themselves.
Good point, TJ. But that rule doesn't go for typing people in TV shows or movies.
No, that's different. That's a different thing.
They don't exist, so you're not actually typing a person. You're
Exactly.
just naming a concept at work.
Tool for learning. Yeah. Well, this has been a great conversation. We've covered so much valuable insight and wisdom again. Any last thoughts, Jeff, TJ?
I got nothing.
Okay. Well, we definitely gave the listeners or those watching a lot to chew on. If you love this conversation, remember this is a 4-part series. Next time, we'll be talking about centers of intelligence.
Get ready for a longer one.
Centers of intelligence. So in case you're not watching or listening to this on Around the Circle, make sure to go and subscribe to Around the Circle on Apple or Spotify, so you can listen to some more amazing episodes like this that are never under 1 hour. So you definitely get your money's worth there.
Hey, once or twice we've been under an hour.
Our announcement episodes.
I love this connecting with you. I mean, as a 3, I could take this transcript and go make some bullet points in ChatGPT, but I'm not going to do that because I love talking with you guys and just really, really enjoy it. So go subscribe to the podcast. The other podcasts, like Start Here, the Find Your Type podcast, TJ mentioned, is another great one. And then the other podcast for movie characters, the pop culture podcast is
movie typing.
Movie typing is very enjoyable. You can find them on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. The links will be below. But as a reminder, stay tuned for part 4 coming up. But thanks so much for watching today. Remember, stay curious, keep learning, keep growing, and make sure to put into action the things that you just learned from TJ and Jeff. And we'll see you in part 4. Stay tuned.